Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful day already, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing in my lab. So I am a scientist and not a philosopher, but I'm really interested in philosophical questions, and I love speaking with philosophers. But what I wanted to talk about today is some science that I think the people in the room, I hope, will be interested in, and I think does raise some potential important questions at the intersection of philosophy and science and also ethics. So the work that we've been doing is focusing on what's called science of science, and this is an interdisciplinary data field that's focused on identifying reproducible patterns that govern the workings of science. So the kinds of questions that we ask in this field are, how does scientific knowledge grow? How does that knowledge get canonized? What are some modern scientific practices? What makes a collaboration successful? How do scientific careers unfold and why? And what role do diversity, innovation, and creativity play in the processes of science? One key observation across a lot of the work in this field is that there exists a scientific self that is centered among particular values, standpoints, cognitive biases, and their own human perceptions. And this is probably no surprise because every scientist is a human with all of the neural, psychological, cognitive, social, and cultural processes that that fact entails. The scientific self also, importantly, exists in different cultural contexts. So whether that's the context of an individual group, is this gonna, not, am I doing that right? No. Oh, it's pointing at the computer, like this? Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna go back here. So whether that's groups, collaboration groups, the institutions that a person is part of, the discipline that they're a part of, or multiple disciplines, and then the country that they live in or were trained in, all of these different levels can provide cultural contexts that impact the way that the scientist works. So what are some specific cultural contexts of the scientific self? One is that different fields of thought work under really distinct notions of, for example, theoretical aesthetics. What's beautiful to a biologist can be really different than what's beautiful to a physicist. The value of parsimony is different across disciplines. And there are some preferred characteristics of explanatory structures. I think that's already come up today. Separate disciplines also recommend distinct forms of scientific rationality or methods to investigate the world, or factors that others in the community would appreciate. And separate countries can have different social norms and funding norms that impact what science gets done, by whom, and how. When we think about those cultural contexts, I naturally want to think about the cultural production. What is being made in these cultures? And one of the things that's being made is scientific papers. And that's a locus of cultural production. It's also the accumulation of these cultural archives in the form of publications that we work on and define ourselves by as scientists. Some papers are published and then are never cited ever. Other papers are published and then canonized in scientific knowledge through the process of citation. They have a life that lives beyond their initial publication. Work in this field has demonstrated that there are a variety of factors that determine which papers get cited and how. One kind of factor is the epistemic value of the paper. So for example, did it provide empirical support for the findings? Was it characterized by simplicity, by generality, by precision, by rigor, by testability, by explanatory power? But there are also some non-epistemic values that are correlated with whether a paper gets published, and that can be common interest. If this paper is published in the area that's of interest to me, I am likely to cite it. But there's also factors of shared gender or same ethnicity, social capital, and also institutional prestige that were correlated with, or even can predict in the future whether that paper gets published or gets cited, sorry. And then there are also seemingly trivial factors, like whether there are punctuation marks in the titles. They'll get cited more. If there are rare words in the titles, or if the title is particularly long, the paper is more likely to get cited. So what we wanted to do in my lab is try to understand a little bit more about how papers in neuroscience get cited, because that's the area of science that I focus on. And given that this was a life science group, I thought we would focus mostly there. I will mention that work in other fields as well, but I'll try to make it clear that that part is not in neuroscience. If I don't say so, then it's coming from neuroscience. So what I want to do over the next couple of minutes is to first demonstrate that there are citation disparities in neuroscience along two different demographic factors. One is gender and one is race and ethnicity. And then I want to move into some of the data that we have that provide explanatory factors for these disparities. And those explanatory factors will cross different group sizes. So some will be personal, some will be dyadic, and some will be group level factors. And then in the final section, I want to talk a little bit about not just who gets cited, but how they're cited, and whether they're cited positively or negatively or neutrally, and how can we understand why and how that happens. So let's focus on number 2 first, citation disparities. How would we study citation disparities in neuroscience? We have 2 papers in this space that roughly characterize 63,000 articles. We chose articles in the top 5 neuroscience journals at the time. In the first study on gender, the papers were drawn from 1995 to 2018. And in the second study in race and ethnicity, the papers were drawn from 1995 to 2019. Now you might wonder how gender, race, and ethnicity are studied in these kinds of bibliometric studies. And what's typically done is that there's a probabilistic gender assignment in gender that is from first names. So using Gender API or Social Security Administration databases, we can say that if somebody has this first name, they have a probability of having been assigned female at birth or identifying as a woman later on social media profiles. That is probabilistic. It's possible that that's not a woman, but it is something that is statistically correlated. And similarly, with race and ethnicity, what we can do is we can use probabilistic assignments from names using voter registration data, Wikipedia, and US Census data. And that's largely based on bi-character structure in the last and first names of the individuals. Now, this is not meant to be an assessment of how that person self-identifies, either in terms of gender or in terms of race and ethnicity. This is actually meant to be more how a person may be observed from the outside by people who may not know them, or people who only know their name, or people who only see the name of the authors on the title of the paper that they're citing. The reason that we're focusing on these perceived gender, race, and ethnicity traits rather than self-identity is that there's a lot of really important work in sociology demonstrating that discrimination and discriminatory behavior is largely based on how someone's perceived, not based on how they identify. So we're trying to track that specific kind of psychological structure. But just to drive home the fact that this is not self-attested identity and also is probabilistic, I want to note that the cutoff that we're using for gender, for example, is that the name has a probability of greater than 0.7 of belonging to a woman. We'll put them in this W bin. And those with names that have a probability of greater than 0.7 of belonging to a man are put in the M bin. There's going to be a small set of names that are not assigned to either of these bins if the probability was less than 0.7. So that also means that people of any gender identity could be in the W bin, or could be in the M bin, or could be in the bin that we do not study. So I just want to make sure that that is clear. What is true about the W bin is that it's going to be people of any gender identity who have a name that's commonly given to kids assigned female at birth or chosen by people who identify as women later. Okay, so how do we assess disparities here? What we will do is that we will say, well, the paper was published at this date. Let's look at all of the papers that one could have cited, and let's characterize the proportions of first and last authors of different genders. So these colors here are indicating the 4 bins that we are studying. So in blue, we're studying papers that have a predicted man in the first and last author position, which are the most important positions in neuroscience papers. In the middle, these 2 greens, they're a woman in the predicted woman in the first author position and man in the last. This one's man in the first author position, woman last, and the last one is a predicted woman in the first and last position. So let's say that a paper is published at a certain period of time and it can cite things in the past, it can't cite things in the future, right? So you're interested in how they would cite if they randomly drew from past papers. Now we know in neuroscience that there are more papers written by men than by women historically, and definitely in this period of time that we are studying. So if you take a random sample, you're naturally going to pull more papers from men. And so we want to account for that, and then we want to ask, well, do we see something that is more biased than that, or just right on the mark, or less biased in one direction or another? And so what we can do when we do this random sampling is that we can show that papers that have a predicted man in the first and last position are oversighted by about 14% here. Sorry, 11.6% exactly. Whereas papers by a predicted woman in the first and last position are undercited by about 30%. And the mixed groups are in the middle. So you can see a really marked citation disparity here. However, it is true that when we cite papers, we don't only cite by randomly sampling what happened in the past. There may be other factors that drive why we choose this paper and we don't choose that paper. Some of those factors, all the ones that we could think of, where, for example, the year of publication, older papers tend to be cited more than younger papers. The journal that the paper was published in, even though we're studying the top 5 journals, if it's published in Nature Neuroscience, we're more likely to cite it than if it's published in Neuroimage. The number of authors is also a big predictor, so if there are more people on the author list, it tends to be cited more. If the paper was a review article, it tends to be cited more than if it was an empirical paper. And if the paper's first or last author or both have greater seniority, the paper's likely to be cited more as well. So we account for those additional 5 factors in the statistical model and ask, do we still see any leftover disparities? And the answer is yes. In this case, the papers that have a man in the first and last author position are oversighted by 5.2%, and those with a predicted woman in the first and last author position are undercited by about 15% for about a 20 percentage point difference. So the next question I asked my student is to look at my citation patterns before I knew this, and that's this. It's not a pretty picture, but I think it's really important to show. So what I would be expected to cite is in the dashed lines here, and then how I actually cited before I knew about this issue is in the colors. So you can see that I do have an oversightation of man-man papers, and I have a massive undercitation of women-women papers, far more than expected at the time in which I was citing. Okay, so another question that we can ask with these data is, well, does everybody cite the same? Or do men and women cite differently, or predicted men and women? And so I have here those 2 groups. So here on the left-hand side, you can see the citation practices that are just in the man-man papers, so first and last author. And then over here, you can see all other papers where there's at least a woman on it, either in the first or last or both positions. And you can see that the largest discrepancies exist in the papers that have a predicted man in the first and last author position, whereas those papers that have a woman in the first, last, or both spots tend to cite a little bit closer to the 0 line. This is interesting for a lot of reasons, but I want you to keep this in mind because we're going to see something very similar in the context of race and ethnicity in a minute. And so you'll see some resonance. Okay, the other question we had is this imbalance staying the same or is it changing with time? And it turns out it's getting worse. We predicted it would be getting better, but it's actually getting worse over time. So here you can see the oversightation of papers from man-man teams is rising from 1995 to 2018, and the undercitation of women papers is getting larger with time as well. So there's a widening disparity that's occurring. And you can see that that widening disparity is marked in the man-man papers. It's a little bit smaller, but still exists in the papers that have a woman in the first or last or both positions. Okay, so let's turn to race and ethnicity, and basically what you're going to see is something very, very similar along the lines of majority-minority groups. So here what we have is papers that are predicted to have a white author in the first and last position, so that's going to be in dark blue here, and then those that have an author of color in the first and last position, and that's going to be in the burnt orange. And then these non-saturated violins are what you would expect if you were randomly drawing from all individuals. So what you can see is that there's an overcitation of papers that have a predicted white first and last author, so by 8%, and an undercitation of papers from authors of color in the first and last position by about 17.2%. And then we can ask a similar thing, is this something that is consistent across everybody, or are there some of us who are doing this more than others? And it's definitely white ciders like me who are driving the majority of this effect. So what you can see here is that white ciders are oversighting other white teams by 12%, and they're underciting author of color papers by about 24%. So really, really marked disparities. Whereas if you look at ciders of color, they are still oversighting the white papers and underciting papers from authors of color, but to a much smaller extent. So the majority of this is being driven by white ciders. There's still some contribution by ciders of color. Here is the same data accounting for all of those additional factors that I mentioned before. So whether it's a review article, the seniority of the senior and first authors, things like that. But we also added the location of the author's institution, because for race and ethnicity, that can be correlated with geography, and we wanted to make sure that we accounted for that statistical relationship. And what you can see is that the same general trend still holds. Is the imbalance changing over time? The answer is not as strikingly as in gender, but it is still changing, and it is slightly widening. And so this is true for white citers. You can see a slight increase in the citation of other white papers, and you can also see that in the authors of color. And then there's a slight decrease in the citation of papers from authors of color over time in both groups, both the white citers and in the citers of color. I want to put these two kinds of data on the same figure so that you can see the relative size of the effects. So what you're observing here along the x-axis is the first author, their predicted race and ethnicity and predicted gender here. And then along the x-axis is the last author, again, predicted race and ethnicity and gender. You can see a very strong block diagonal structure where there's roughly more red over here in the top left and more dark blue over here in the bottom right. That is the gender effect. And then inside of the gender effect, you can see variations by race and ethnicity. And in particular, I'll call out the highest and lowest. So the most oversighted papers are those that have a predicted white man in the first position and a predicted white man in the last position. And then the most undercited are papers that have a predicted black woman in the first position and a predicted black woman in the last position. And you can see the difference here is between 24 and 47. So that's, over 70% difference, points difference. So as you can imagine, that could have a really big impact on people's careers, for sure, and then also the kinds of questions that are being asked and followed up on. Okay, so those are the disparities that we've observed. What I want to do now is to turn to some of the explanatory factors that we've observed that relate to these effects. Some are personal, some are dyadic, and some are the group. I also wanted to notice that these disparities I showed you in neuroscience have been observed in other fields as well. So they've been observed in astronomy, in physics, in cognitive science, in medicine, in international relations, political science, and communications. This is probably not an exhaustive list, but it is something that is very consistent. One of the personal factors that we observed to be related to the effect is, I like to call this the citing like it's 1995. Effect. It is where the proportion of citations that we're giving to different groups has stayed static for the last 25 years and is very close to the observed demographics of the field 25 years ago. But as the field diversified, our citation practices did not. So to show you that with the data, along here is the y-axis is the proportion of citations, and what you can see here is the observed proportion. You can see it's fairly static with an uptick toward the end here, but the expected, according to the actual pool of papers available, should have been going down like this, right? So how much the man-man teams are cited, because there are fewer papers from man-man teams because the field has become more diverse over time. And you can see a similar thing here for teams that have a woman in the first or last position. You can see the observed citation proportion stays pretty static, whereas we would expect a change. So this suggests that there's just some stasis, perhaps in our mental model of our scientific community and the demographics that exist. Another factor that is related, and this one comes from physics, is our familiarity or our likely familiarity with the paper that's being cited. So if we cite close to our field of study in physics, we tend to cite with greater parity. And if we cite farther away from our subfield in physics, we tend to cite with greater bias or more disparity. And just to show you that, if we're citing inside of our field, if everybody is citing inside of their field, that's this dark black one. And then if they're citing outside of the field, that's the gray one here. And if you see that change, what's happening is an undercitation of the women papers along the y-axis and an overcitation of the man-man papers. So as you're moving to papers that you may be less familiar with because they're farther away from your field, you tend to be citing more along the lines of the majority group. There are also dyadic factors that we observed, specifically in co-authorship. So when we cite more locally within our co-authorship network, we tend to cite in a more imbalanced way. So what we observed, and I'm not going to show the data for this here, but it's in the papers, what we find is that the most imbalanced white citers tend to cite more locally within their co-authorship network. And those white citers who cited more consistently with the actual demographics are the people who cite farther away from their immediate co-authors. Something similar is observed in citers of color. So the most imbalanced citers of color are utilizing longer paths to reach white authors, passing over authors of color who are nearer to them. The second dyadic factor that we observed is about looking for and quantifying the overrepresentation of man-man teams in someone's co-authorship network. So you can look at my co-authorship network, you can look at who I am collaborating with, and you can see how many man-man papers are being written by my co-authors. And if I have a lot of overrepresentation of men in my co-authorship network and overrepresentation of man-man papers in the co-authorship network, I'm likely to cite in a more biased way. So the way that we do that is that we quantify how many man co-authors and woman co-authors a person has, well, again, predicted gender here. And also we look at overrepresentation of the papers from different groups as well. And then we account for that inside of the statistical model. And what we observe is that the actual overcitation is in this dashed line here. And then in color, what I'm showing you is how much variance is explained when we account for the overrepresentation of men in the co-authorship network and man-man teams in the co-authorship paper network. So you can see that there's significant variance explained by that overrepresentation. It doesn't capture everything, but it's definitely a factor that's soaking up some of the variance here. Okay, so now I want to move from personal factors to dyadic factors to group factors. There are wild differences across fields, which I think are really interesting. And this we were able to see mostly in physics. So physics has very well specified separate subdisciplines. And you can see those over here on the right-hand side. So AMO is atomic, molecular, and optical. CM is condensed matter. This is nuclear, high energy physics, soft matter physics, nano physics, and astrophysics. And then in gray is general physics. And I've separated the data into the citation patterns for man-man teams and for teams that have a woman. And what you can see is that the larger discrepancies are again in this group of authors, but they're also present in the papers that have a woman in the first and last position, especially in the when citing general physics articles. So you can see again the overrepresentation of man-man papers in those citations and underrepresentation of women papers. interestingly, I want to point out the opposite effect happening in astrophysics. So here what you can see is actually there's an under-citation of man-man papers in astrophysics and an over-citation of women-women papers in astrophysics. So the effect that we are observing with an over-citation of man-man teams is consistently true when you're just looking at men authors, but it's not consistently true when you're looking at women authors. We actually observe the opposite effect in astrophysics. So just because you see it in one of these subdomains or subfields doesn't mean you're going to see it in all of them, and I'm very interested from a sociology point of view why that field is different. It definitely has a much higher proportion of women than any of the other subfields. So that may change the perception, perhaps, and mental model of who's in the field. There's also an effective journal impact factor. So the results that I've showed you so far are very striking in neuroscience if you look at the top 5 journals. So that's where we see the overrepresentation of overcitation of man-man teams and undercitation of women teams. But if you look at the next 45 journals with lower impact factors, the tendency is to cite a lot closer to the 0 line. So this seems to be something that's especially present in the high impact journal locations and how we engage with those papers in the high impact journal locations. Okay, so why do these citation disparities exist? There are at least some correlations that I think help to explain what's going on. At the personal level, there's this effective stasis where we cite like it's a long time ago. There's also this effective familiarity, citing farther afield, we tend to be more imbalanced. I think possibly because we are using tools of visibility probably to cite farther afield and less dependent on our actual knowledge. And because structures of visibility privilege people from certain demographic groups, we're more likely to be biased when we're citing under those structures of visibility. The 2 dyadic factors we're citing locally in your co-authorship network and also having an overrepresentation of the majority group in your co-authorship network. And then at the group level, we saw there are differences by field, and there's definitely an effect of the journal impact factor, with most of the imbalances being present in the high impact factor journals. Okay, with that, what I want to do is switch content a little bit to talk about citation sentiment. So rather than just, this is all about who gets cited, but I haven't told you yet whether people are being cited positively or negatively or neutrally. And it turns out there are fascinating effects in how we're citing people in that context. So there's actually been a lot of work in bibliometrics, but also in psychology in trying to understand how people cite and why people cite in different ways. So people have studied that citations and demonstrated that citations have very different kinds. Some can be epistemic, some can be procedural, some can be positive or negative, some can indicate support or contrast. Some are given to indicate the status of a paper as a classic or fundamental in the field. Some citations represent the work accurately and some citations represent the work inaccurately, and those are really amusing to study. And then a lot of citations are also chosen for social reasons. So for name dropping, soliciting favor from a scholar who might have influence in the review process. They can be done for mercantile reasons, such as bartering for citations in return. Also for alignment reasons, so transmitting a specific self-image as part of the mainstream or part of the avant-garde or part of a given school of thought. And so there are some fascinating studies that have actually asked scholars, why did you put that citation in there? What was the purpose of that one? And these are some of the answers that have come out. So it's pretty complicated. We're not going to go that far. That's a lot of information. What we're just going to do is separate out the citations that have favorable sentiment, so indicating a positive assessment or evaluation of the work, like these people elegantly showed this, or they used this optimized method or powerful tool, or ones that indicate consensus. That's going to be a favorable sentiment. We'll also identify the critical sentiments. Those indicate debate or disagreement or the limitations of a prior paper, for example. And then others would be neutral. They'll just say X was reported. That's a very neutral statement. It doesn't say it's good, bad, just is. And we use a large language model and a human set of raters in connection with one another to separate out these three different kinds of sentiments. So we study this in papers that are drawn from 185 different neuroscience journals with an impact factor of 3 or greater in 2022. They're from 56,000 different last authors from 27 departments and 23 countries. And we take the largest connected citation network in that set, and that gives us over 100,000 papers that we're studying. We study every single sentence, and we pull out the sentences that have citations in them, and then we assess the sentiment in the sentence that has the citation. We are looking for, we came into this with the hypothesis that people are going to be citing in a way that indicates their in-group alliances. And so if you're citing someone who's part of your group, you're going to cite more favorably. If you're citing somebody outside of your group, you might cite them more critically. That's the hypothesis. And there are a couple different group structures we were interested in. The first is collaboration. So our hypothesis is that when we cite our collaborators, we tend to cite them favorably, and when we cite non-collaborators, we would tend to cite them a little bit more critically. We also hypothesize that if the two people have a shared social status, which in science can be in part indicated by the H index, then they may be citing each other more favorably because they're part of that crowd. Whereas if you cite somebody of a different H index, you may be citing differently. And then similarly, we hypothesize that if you cite someone of the same gender, there may be some homophily and some in-group bias where you tend to cite more positively to people of the same gender and cite more critically the ones of a different gender. We also hypothesize that these in-group dynamics might be altered or modulated by how big we perceive our in-group to be, and that can be changed or modulated by both discipline and country. So in the context of the discipline, we hypothesize that if you're in a discipline where people consistently write a lot of review papers that synthesize information from many different laboratories and many different theoretical approaches and different methods, then people are going to feel like their scientific world is pretty large and cite in a way that assumes more people are in their in-group because there's this intellectual synthesis that's happening around them that they've embraced. Whereas for those disciplines that don't publish as many review papers, we hypothesize that there would be a tendency for people to see their group as pretty small and then cite accordingly, so cite more critically on average to everybody else, assuming that most people are in the outgroup. We also evaluated the proportion of wet lab articles. And the reason that we did that is that wet labs in neuroscience tend to have larger groups than theoretical dry lab groups. And they also tend to have more funding, which then allows them to have more people. And they also tend to have larger conferences as well. And so those factors together, we thought could increase their perception of the size of the in-group. And so we would hypothesize that those people who are citing that wet lab articles are going to have more positive or favorable sentiment because they perceive more people to be in their in-group. And then there are two factors at the country level that we also thought might be important here. One is the degree of collectivism in the attitude of the country. And then the second one is power distance, or your acceptance of power differentials, and knowing that even if you're low in status or high in status, you're still both on the same team. And that's measured at a country level as well. And those two could impact how people view others in their community and whether there are more people in their community or fewer people in their community. So I'll show you some of the data for that too. But first I want to just focus on the in-group dynamics part. This one is the first effect, so just looking at in-group members as part of your collaboration network. So this 0 mark here is the sentiment that you have when you're citing yourself. So you can see that you cite yourself the most favorably of anyone in the world, which completely makes sense. We didn't actually hypothesize that, but in hindsight, yes, okay, makes sense. And then as you go to your immediate co-authors, you do cite them favorably as well, but not as favorably as you cite yourself. And then as you go to co-authors of co-authors, it goes down a little bit, and et cetera. It keeps going down after that, right? So it tracks with the distance from yourself. The critical line is also fascinating. You really are very not critical of your work. When it's published, you have a little bit more of a critical sentiment towards people you co-author with, but as you move out to people further and further away on your collaboration network, you become more critical. And you kind of distribute neutral sentiments pretty evenly across the collaboration network. Okay, one interesting question is what happens at the transition when somebody might have been not a collaborator before, but is a collaborator now? So this 0 mark is the line of your first collaboration with somebody. You can see that you were very critical for the last 4 years. And then when you collaborate with them, all of a sudden you're very favorable. Which I think is just fascinating. I know, does it switch? Actually, that would be great question. We should, if there was a way to identify people who have fallen out scientifically, yeah, I think that would be really a great example. We could look at that. Okay, the next one is how citation sentiment tracks with H index. And I want you to first just look at the blue 2 panels here. So this is critical sentiment and favorable sentiment. What you can see is that when you're citing your collaborators, you tend to have low critical sentiment and high favorable sentiment. That's just what we saw before. When you're citing your collaborators, you're mostly favorable, not very critical. And that's true whether you're citing somebody with a higher H index than you or a lower H index than you. It's pretty consistent. Where we do see a really interesting modulation by H index difference is in the non-collaborator groups, and that's these 2 orange ones here. You can see that there is a U-shaped curve here, and there's also a U-shaped curve here, which indicates that people cite most favorably and least critically when they cite other people of their same H index, so no H index difference. But then as they cite individuals with a higher H index or with a lower H index, they tend to cite more critically and less favorably. And the most marked effects are when a high H index scholar cites a lower H index scholar. So that's these 2 that I've put the arrows on here. When a high H index scholar cites a lower H index scholar, they tend to be very critical, the most critical, and also the least favorable. And I think this is interesting because you could imagine that it could create some inertia in science, right? Where the people who have a high H index tend to be older, they tend to be more senior, and if they're consistently citing the younger ones, the ones with a lower H index, which tend to be younger, if that is consistently critical, then that could produce a pulling back or an inertia in science where those new ideas have to fight harder in order to be accepted. Okay, what about gender differences? So we hypothesized that we would cite people of the same gender more favorably and less critically. We actually don't see that. So what we saw is something different. We're still trying to work out exactly why this is the case. But what you can see here, just look at this bin first. Here's the critical sentiment, and this is predicted men. So they tend to have a lot of critical sentiment in their papers. Women tend to have slightly less critical sentiment in their papers. Let's jump over here to favorable sentiment. You can see that men have a certain amount of favorable sentiment and women have less. So just from this data, what you can see is that the men tend to have more affective engagement. They're both more critical and more favorable to everyone, whereas women tend to use less affective engagement when they're citing and do it more neutrally. But then you can also see that there's a difference by in-group and out-group. So when men are citing other men, they are more critical than they are on average. When they're citing women, they're a little bit less critical. Similarly with favorable citation, when a man is citing another man, it tends to be somewhat favorable, and when they're citing women, it's less favorable. So again, there's both more critical and more favorable sentiment when a man cites another man, and then that is somewhat ameliorated when they're citing, or it's pulled down when they're citing women. And women do something similar. So when a woman is citing another woman, you can see that they have this degree of criticality, and then when they're citing a man, they're more critical, which is interesting. And then here you can see when a woman is citing another woman, there's this much favorable. When they're citing a man, they're a little bit more favorable. So they're both a little bit more critical and a little bit more favorable to the man papers. So the picture here is a lot more complicated and I think that we have to do a lot more to unpack exactly why each of these directions is what it is. But it's not as simple as people more generally favorably cite their own group. Okay, so now I want to go through the 3 factors that could modify those in-group, out-group dynamics according to different perceived in-group sizes. The first one I had mentioned earlier was the discipline. And so I'm showing you here what happens when we account for the proportion of reviews in a field. We call that measure synthesis, but it's just the proportion of review articles in the field. So here what you can see is that the degree of critical sentiment decreases significantly as the proportion of review articles increases. So for those disciplines that have more review articles and synthesize more ideas for their scholars, they tend to have less critical sentiment. So down here are fields like biology. Up here in the more critical areas that have less review articles are computer science. Well, this is all in neuroscience, right? So it's computer scientists and in neuroscience, physics and neuroscience, math and neuroscience, statistics and neuroscience. Okay, you can see a similar effect when we look at different disciplines. So this is a benchwork score for the paper. We take all of the sentences in the paper and we assess how likely this is to be a wet lab study versus a dry lab study. And what you can see is that the more the paper has benchwork content or is likely to be from a wet lab tends to have less critical sentiment. Consistent with the larger size of these groups, their respective conferences, and their funding levels. And then those disciplines that have less benchwork, more dry lab, more computational, and more theoretical, those tend to have more critical sentiment, consistent with what we hypothesize to be a smaller in-group size. And then what about culture? That was the last thing I mentioned. So the 2 factors in culture, one was collectivism or individualism. So individualism measures the degree to which people believe that the interests of the individual should take precedence over those of the group. So you can imagine if you're from an individualistic culture like the United States, which is where I'm from, then you might see the world as mostly revolving around you, and that your interests take precedence over the interests of the group. If that's the case, then we can imagine that my perceived in-group size is relatively small. It's the size of 1. And therefore, I might cite everyone else more critically in general, just as an attitude toward the world. Whereas if I was from a collectivistic country, where the belief is that everyone is part of the community and everybody's interests matter equally, then I may also embrace more of the scholarly community as part of my own and cite less critically. And that's what we see. So along the y-axis here is the degree of individualism in a country, and this is measured separately. This is not something we measure. This is measured by large survey data in many different countries, and what you can see here is that the degree of individualism, as it increases, so does the critical sentiment in the papers from the scholars in that field, in that country. So you can see the United States is up here, so that's where I am. This is China, not Canada, just in case anybody was curious. Yeah. Okay, so there's definitely a relationship here where countries with greater individualism show greater critical sentiment, consistent with this shrinking of the perceived group size. And a similar notion is what's called power distance. This is again something that's measured at the country level and indicates the degree to which you accept that there's an unequal distribution of power, and if you're in the less powerful position, you're still on the same team as the more powerful people, and vice versa, that you're looking out for each other even though you're at different places in the social hierarchy. And so those individuals who are in countries where there's more power distance, so more acceptance of this variation in power, tend to cite less critically, consistent with a larger perceived group size, whereas those individuals who are from countries that do not embrace or accept the unequal distribution of power, there tends to be more critical sentiment. Okay, so what have we seen here? The data support this notion that citation sentiment tracks in-group, out-group dynamics such that more favorable and less critical sentiment is applied to in-group members than to out-group members. That was especially true in the assessment of collaboration in the collaboration network, and also individuals with a similar H index versus a different H index. It was less supported by our analysis of gender. We also studied how perceived in-group size could potentially impact or modulate these effects, and we observed that it differed by discipline and by country in ways that are connected to the potential size of the perceived in-group. Okay, so I just want to briefly summarize, and then I'm happy to take questions. Summary here is that citations, going back to the beginning of the talk, citations are preferentially given to papers whose authors are white and men in neuroscience and in other disciplines that I mentioned. Imbalances are increasing with time and driven largely by majority groups. The factors that modulate the degree of citation imbalance exist on multiple scales. They are personal, so we cite like it's 1995, enforcing the stasis of the perceived proportions of people in the field, and it's also impacted by familiarity with the field that we're citing. It's also dyadic in nature, so if we cite more locally on the co-authorship network or have overrepresentation of majority groups, then we'll cite in a more biased way. And there are group level factors as well, so differences by subfield and by journal impact factor. The work in citation sentiment in neuroscience tracks these multi-scale in-group, out-group dynamics according to collaboration and H index, and is modulated by discipline and country. So collectively, these studies do demonstrate that science is social, and that scientific practices are human practices. Turning to the future, some of the questions that I have and that sometimes keep me up at night, but also sometimes wake me up positively in the morning, is do scholars have inaccurate models of the scientific world? I think the answer is probably yes. Especially the citing like it's 1995 is to me is a pretty clear piece of evidence in favor of that idea. I wonder what kinds of epistemic narrowing occur or proceed when our citation practices inaccurately represent scientific knowledge. So if we're only pulling from some of what's out there, then that would change what people read about, which is going to change what then they think to study, right? I'm also curious if there's an appropriate ethics of citation in science. What would that ethics be like? I'm also really curious about whether there should be an ethics of citation sentiment in science. Is there a good or bad way to assign sentiment in citation sentences? Yeah, is there something I should be thinking about carefully there? When I saw that there was a disparity in my citation practices and who I was citing, that it was pretty clear to me I wanted to fix and should fix, and that was the good thing to do. But with citation sentiment, I'm less clear what's good and what's bad, or even if those are the right words to be using. I'm also curious what sorts of epistemic injustices might be trickling down into these citation practices and how we can address them, especially the data showing that when we cite further afield, we cite in a more biased way. It suggests to me that we're depending on these structures of visibility, and those certainly carry epistemic injustices with them. So I think that at least suggests I should be thinking about this, but there might be other places in the data that this is showing up too. And then lastly, is the increasing use of large language models in scientific writing and the use of search algorithms in identifying relevant work changing our citation practices? And if so, how? And then, if so, how do we do something about it if it's going in a direction that we don't want? The people who were really important in this work, there were many, many people, but the ones that I wanted to point out are Jordan Dworkin, who did the gender study in neuroscience, Max Bordolero, who did the race and ethnicity study in neuroscience, Aaron Tyke, who did the physics study where we could see these effects of different subfields and familiarity, and Pixel, who did the citation sentiment study. And with that, I'm going to end and happy to take questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dani. We have a lot of hands raised, so I'm going to go to Dave first and
Thank you for this amazing presentation. And maybe because I'm a student, I'm not very familiar with academic really. So I'm curious about what does citation imply? Like from a perspective of students, most cited paper, the most cited researches for me implies that I will read them first. Like if I want to know about something about scientific explanation, the most cited paper like Craver's work, like mechanistic explanation, I will definitely read that first. But I'm not, since that we do cite works in different ways. So I'm curious about what does the citation really means, that related to what does injustice of citation really means. Because I'm not really sure in a like not a student, a mature academic area, does citation means that you're most respected in this area or you're representative in this area? I just.
Yeah, I think that, so the data that I showed you, for me, indicates that when a paper is highly cited, part of that citation may be due to the merit of the work, and other parts of that may be due to human factors that do not relate to the merit of the work. What that eventually then means, if you follow that through, is that the papers that are most highly cited aren't necessarily the papers that are the most meritorious. And that's because of structures, I believe, because structures of inequality that have come into play at multiple points in time along that paper's life. So I would say, if you take one thing from the talk, I would say don't believe that the papers that are most highly cited are the ones you should read first. And then I'm going to flip that back to the responsibility that I have as a scholar. So you're a student, right? What is my responsibility as a scholar in choosing the papers that I cite in my review articles or in the introductions to my papers or the discussion sections? I think I have a responsibility to equitably and fairly represent the ideas in the field and the people who have those ideas in the field. And so with that in mind, I should have a distribution of citations to the scholars who are my colleagues that is fair and accurately represents them. And that's something that I need to do. And the more I do that, the more the papers that have the relationship between paper merit and number of citations that you see will change.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's fascinating and troubling.
Yeah.
Not to draw back attention to your citations, although that's quite striking.
It's bad.
And I want to put that first, and then we'll get back to it. I just want to tell a really quick story. A few years ago, I taught a course on epistemology in the age of fake news. Just asking the question of what knowledge assessment and what knowledge production looks like in the current climate of distrust. When I put together the syllabus for this course, I didn't try to do this, even though I normally do. I came out with a massively diverse set of readings. I didn't change. None of the things you measured changed. My network didn't change. None of those things changed. The question that I asked changed. And just because I asked a different question, I suddenly had probably a highly overrepresentative sample of readings for women and people of color.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, so it was surprising, sort of, except that you're in a highly technical subfield
Yeah.
of neuroscience in which the gender disparity and I would imagine race disparity is already present in the production of the articles.
Yes.
So how much of this can be explained or driven by communities that you didn't measure, that is communities of interest and the questions and things like this? Does that make sense as a question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one way that I can answer that is that at least in neuroscience, we did an analysis that's in the supplement of this paper here. I don't know if that thing is going to go away. Okay. Yeah, in the bottom. In the supplement of that paper, we look at subdisciplines inside of neuroscience, and one of them is developmental, one of them is computational, one of them is something else. I forget all of the names. But we do observe that actually the degree of overcitation and undercitation of these groups is pretty consistent and not exacerbated in computational neuroscience, but also not lower in computational neuroscience. So the percentages of the actual demographics of those fields are different, but that's accounted for on this 0 line. So we're flattening out who's actually in the field. So my disparities here aren't because I'm in computational neuroscience. These are beyond what would be expected in computational neuroscience. So that's one thing. But the other I think thing that your comment brought up for me is, so I've had a process question for myself and my laboratory for a while, which is that, okay, we have these questions, we follow the pursuit of the question, we do the experiment, we discover something, we write up the paper, and then at the end, after we've written up the paper, we assess what citations we included, and are we getting close to like what would be relevant in that area of neuroscience, or are we drastically off? The answer is that usually we're drastically off. And so we go back to the literature and we say, who else is working in this field, especially who are the postdocs and who are the assistant faculty that have been hired in the last 5 years, like since COVID, who I haven't had like any, I haven't spent as much time with cognitively mentally as with people who I knew in grad school, for example. And so then we adjust our citations and include more of the work that's from more kinds of more people, and definitely more younger people. I think that often helps because sometimes I've cited something that it helps not just to be more equitable, but also I think it helps the content, because a lot of times I've cited something that's vaguely related to the statement that I'm making, but it's not actually the strongest piece of evidence in support of the statement that I'm making, and the paper that's from the younger person is actually stronger evidence. And so it actually strengthens the science that I'm doing, which I appreciate. However, it is at the end of the process. And so another question is, well, how do we engage with the work of all of our colleagues equitably from the beginning in the development of the question, and in the development of the experiment, and in the method we choose to use, and in everything else before we actually go and write the paper? And so I think it's one thing to try to put the fairness on at the end, and I think that there's something important about that, but it's also, you have to do that. I think that it's important to do that in combination with thinking more earlier in the process about what questions everyone is asking and what are the questions that aren't being taken up by the field because of these structures of oppression. Yeah.
I think Okay, thanks so much for this talk. I thought it was really interesting, and particularly what stayed with me was the discussion of like the country perceptions, where we talk about collectivism and power dynamics.
Yeah.
And it specifically reminded me of a couple years ago, Heather Douglas came out with an article talking about restructuring science funding. And just trying to get different platforms out to highlight avenues of science that are underdeveloped or geographical parts of the world that don't necessarily receive a lot of funding. And I think this is preliminarily seen with like the transparency and like Nature's peer review process right now. So looking to the future with your research, is this like reallocation of funding something that you've explicitly explored, and how that kind of trickles into these citation practices?
Hmm. I have not studied reallocation of funding. Whether that would change the citation practices, I don't know. Probably, my guess is that the answer is yes and no. So why might it not change citation practices? If we are citing like the demographics were 25 years ago, we're not actually just even noticing the people who are in front of us running labs that are fully funded and have multiple graduate students, right? So whether they get more funding or not isn't going to change the fact that we're citing like they don't exist because we're citing like it was 25 years ago. So that's the pessimistic part. And then the more positive part is that if there's a change in the funding structures such that more funding is allocated with principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then my guess is that those individuals, that is one structure that will increase the visibility of those scientists, and that will trickle down to positively impact citation practices. But which of these is stronger or how they would play out over time, I have no idea. That would be interesting to try to simulate.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks. I think that's everything you said is exceptionally interesting, and things that, regardless of field, we should be sort of conscious and aware of. I had sort of like two questions. The first one is just sort of like a suggestion or perhaps an invitation to talk more about like the epistemic injustice possible components. So epistemic injustice is not like in my wheelhouse. I'm not like an expert or anything, but the two main kinds of like testimonial injustice and hermeneutical injustice don't seem well suited to capture the kind of worries that you might have. And I went to a talk just a couple weeks ago with someone who was arguing that there are distinct kinds of epistemic injustices that concern shared inquiry. So when we engage in sort of joint inquiry together, there are certain kinds of things that you're owed in virtue of being like a participant in it. And the person was citing a lot of things involving joint action. So the standard thought experiment is like going on a walk together. What does it mean to go on a walk together? And what does it mean to act in such a way that the walk, is undermined, where someone just sort of goes in a different direction?
Yeah.
So I wonder if thinking through sort of the appropriate contributions that individuals should make at the different stages of the scientific process as shared inquirers is sort of a way of getting a grip on the sort of epistemic worries about people not having their research taken seriously or cited properly or so on. So that's like a suggestion or thought.
Interesting.
And then the second one, to just sort of play devil's advocate, I wonder how much of these disparities and specific patterns are ones that we should be concerned about and we think are sort of epistemically vicious, whereas other ones we might think are epistemically good.
Yeah.
So one that jumps out to me that is perhaps misguided because it's presupposing that like the H index is like a metric of like the quality of work. But you said, if I recall, that people who are cited more highly, when they cite people who are
Less.
low in the H index, do so very critically.
Yeah.
And I wonder if one could just sort of take a sort of Kuhnian attitude and be like, well, that's not a bad thing. We don't want the riffraff to, like undermine the orthodoxy. There should be sort of a presumption against, these troublemakers. Have you seen the kids these days and what they're putting forward?
Yeah.
So, are there some aspects of these kinds of patterns that we think are part of sort of epistemically appropriate sociological descriptions of how science can function well, while also acknowledging that there's probably a bunch of concerns on the other metrics? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I definitely have more clear concerns about who's getting cited. But for the citation sentiment part, I feel like if you cite more favorably and you're from a more collectivistic country, I don't see anything, I can't see that there's something specifically wrong with that, for example, right? I think what may end up happening in that case is that then certain there could be the content in the literature may be skewed affectively in favor of some groups and less in favor of others because of the nature of how people write. So maybe downstream, it could have impacts that I need to think through carefully. For this one, I think we should be citing favorably or critically in relation to the merit of the work, which I don't think should be related to the H-index, that lots of H-index people can write not great papers, and lots of low H-index people can write amazing papers. And it's not, especially because H-index is highly correlated with seniority and with age. This curve troubles me. It doesn't strike me as positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this work. That's the first thing I wanted to say. There are examples of women philosophers who've chosen to start their careers having initials for their first name in order to avoid things in this space.
Yeah.
I had a question about a potential explanation for the pattern where the male papers are more critical of male papers and maybe the same.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is common in other fields, but sometimes in philosophy and philosophy of science, we're encouraged to pitch our paper by citing some place where you think someone else has done something wrong. And if you do it for someone who's viewed as high status or high citation, then there's this kind of view that you get like more bang for your buck, or you'll get more attention, and that you're sort of looking for those big figures who've made a mistake, and that there's something good about doing that.
Yeah.
Versus, so it's like looking for like these top dogs.
Yeah.
If it's the case that those people are more often men with high citation counts, would that be something that could potentially explain that? Or would it be ruled out with
Yeah, if we separated this out by who people were at, the H-index of the person they're citing, I think that could be very relevant. In the paper, there's a large literature in studying mammalian social groups, so specifically like macaque monkeys and other kinds of non-human primates. And when people are in strong social hierarchies, often, this is not humans, often the males will, be more aggressive to some parts of the social hierarchy, and they'll show more favoritism to other parts of the hierarchy. So they're basically the social currency that they're using is strong in both directions, whereas the females won't. And there's some argument that's in order to negotiate those hierarchies, actively engaging across the social structure with both aggression and favoritism is helpful. And so I'm curious in science and maybe in philosophy whether there is a way that we think we need to engage, and we teach students to engage in the presence of social hierarchy, which is to be very critical of this idea so that yours stands out, and then be very favorable to this group because they're closest to what you are trying to show, and so you can align with them. It's basically negotiating, right, the structure of the society, and I think that that's what's coming out here. There's also, or it could be what's coming out here, there's also a lot of work in history and sociology for narratives about women, that they are more emotional and more fight more easily, and a lot of narratives like that. And it could definitely be that in science, women feel like they need to actively work against those narratives in order to be accepted, which could squash the affective engagement, and that could be partly what we're seeing here. These are potential explanations, but we don't know what's actually driving it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I found this fascinating, and I have two maybe annoying questions because I'm going to ask you to talk about things that you're not explicitly considering, but I'm dying to know more.
Great.
So the first one is, do you happen to know how this works in philosophy? If there is the same tendency or not? I can imagine there being differences. So most philosophy papers only have one author, maybe two, but you can clearly see their names. So yeah, I was wondering about that. I don't know if you know. And the second thing is, I found it fascinating that the gap is widening when it comes to men group citing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about why. Do you think that it could have something to do with this? I don't know how to call it. I'm thinking about this sort of report that King's College London published like a couple of months ago, where they were saying that younger men tend to have more misogynistic views, such as wives should always listen to their husbands, and it seems like these beliefs are becoming more popular, probably because of online circumstances. Do you think that this could have something to do? I found it weird, but I don't know, maybe.
So why the gap is widening, and especially for the men citers, I think. So I'm trying to see if there's an answer from the data that I can give you. So, and then of course, speculation can also be on the table. But from the data, it is true that if there is this stasis, right, where we're citing like it was a long time ago, and then the question is how much has changed over the last 25, 30, 40 years, the proportion of white men in neuroscience has decreased significantly, right? And so based on that, because there are white women, there are women of color, there are men of color, and all three of those groups are increasing in size. So it's possible that if you're citing like it was, 25 or 30 years ago, and those proportions are drastically changing, then that at least partially explains the widening gap, right? Yeah. And then we don't see as much of a widening gap in women, maybe in part because they're citing closer to the zero line to begin with, but then also their group size is not decreasing, it's increasing, right? And so the discrepancy between the truth and citing, like it was a little while ago, is working in the opposite direction.
Hi. I think I'm going to ask you a philosophy question since we're here, rather than ask you about random network details. So an observation I made when I was studying interdisciplinary philosophy was that a lot of times people would be hypercritical of fields they were not in, but kind of due to not understanding why the methodologies were the way they were. So not from like a meritorious standpoint, but from a like, I don't know why you think you're measuring what you're measuring. And then it would be higher criticalness. But that's a anecdotal observation at best. I know that you did a little bit of work in like neuroscience subfields graph. I just wondered if you had any observations or thoughts on the topic of like what is actually being criticized.
Yeah. Yeah. So in our statistical model in the citation sentiment paper, I didn't mention this, but we do test for similarities in the content of the paper to try to ensure that content differences are not, that variance is soaked up. So what you're seeing for the discipline country level effects like collectivism, the H index, all of those things, we've tried to soak up the variance of content differences. However, you're also pointing to it's the familiarity finding, where when we cite close to our field, we are citing more equitably, and when we're citing farther from our field, we're citing less equitably. That one, we did not account for content similarity. In fact, that was something we were interested in, is like when you're citing something that's far away in terms of content, how do you cite? So these two pieces, those two studies don't have the same methods. So one is accounting for content similarity and one is not. I think the initial finding of that familiarity is an important factor here does suggest that, well, I interpreted it as that when you cite farther afield, you're depending upon structures of visibility to see that person. But what you're raising is a second kind of explanation, which is that it's also possible that you just assume that somebody in the fields that are further away from you have methods that are wrong because you don't understand, or you said them more critically because you don't understand them. It's possible that that has a role to play. I'm trying to think about whether there would be a way for us to quantify that or know if that was present. There are definitely some fights in neuroscience we could study where there are kind of groups that, one group who might have negative comments towards and citations of papers that use fMRI data, for example, but often the critiques that they provide in those sentences aren't necessarily an accurate reflection of how the field looks right now. I wonder if there are other examples where we know in the field that there is a separation or a disconnection in the field that seems to be not necessarily more related to not understanding the field, a little bit more about ignorance than it is about a critique. Yeah, thank you.
Do you have a question? Okay.
Oh, thank you. I guess with Lauren, I could say I really enjoy having you here. I'm sad about a lot of these things that you report, and I guess the question is, what is the way forward? I mean, some of these factors we can't change. Maybe people and their attitudes and how they feel about certain people, but is there any sense in which we could develop some sort of like PubMed doesn't help to, is there any way to crowdsource or to, I mean, granted, there'll be bias, maybe, but is there any way to create a database that would link things in ways that would make somebody accountable? Because that is what there's lacking, right? Some sort of accountability. We don't, I mean, and sometimes maybe it's, yeah, I mean, as you pointed to, there are a variety of different factors that may be at play, but is there any hope to kind of fix to work towards fixing part of this problem? And is anybody working on that, or is that something you're doing? Or sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think so. There are a couple of different things that have happened. One thing I should note is that I do really strongly believe in the power of awareness. And that's why I like to show the picture of what my citations looked like before I knew about this, right? It's not that I actively dislike a group of people, and that's true for like everybody in the room, right? Is that you just don't know when there are certain biases that are coming out, that are baked into our culture, and are definitely baked into science for sure. And the hard sciences especially, right? So I think one thing we can all do is just raise awareness and be like, hey, did you know about this thing? Because once we're aware, then we can change it. The second thing is that we developed a tool where you can put your reference list in it, and it'll spit out percentages and tell them if you're close to what's currently out there in the field or not. And so that's a nice tool for kind of self-reflection, and then you can do with that data what you want. I use that for our papers regularly. And then the third thing is one of my students developed a Chrome extension that will take results from Google Scholar and will flag papers that are from non-majority groups for you, so that you can like make sure that your eyes aren't passing over them. And that I think is a helpful tool as well. The last intervention I guess I'll mention is that there is a journal in cognitive science that had a new editor, and he changed the author submission portal or the instructions to say, when you submit your paper, please be aware that citation disparities exist and consider what your references reflect. If you're curious about whether your references are reflecting one group more than another, here's a tool you can use. They didn't require the people use them, but it did offer the tool to them and did raise awareness of the issue. And then they looked at the citation patterns the year before he came in as an editor and after 12 months of this change in the author instructions, and they saw an offset of the disparity. So that's kind of cool. And again, it wasn't required, but it raised awareness and offered a tool. So I feel like there are lots of things that could be done, and all of them help.
Right. Yeah. No. And raising awareness, I think, is so important. So I didn't want to say that it wasn't. So.
Oh yeah.
I then it's like, can we? Yeah. Is there a way to? Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Is there a way to do more? I don't know.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
But this is the direction. This is the right direction. So. Yeah, thank you.
This is probably a nonsensical question, but how is AI playing a role in all of that?
Yeah. That's what I want to know. Yeah. I don't know. We have other work that is, we definitely know and are studying how AI changes the affective content of work, scientific work. So if you take your ideas and you put it through ChatGPT or other large language models, and then you take what's comes out of it, we actually see a really marked increase in the use of aggressive language and other kinds of language that has different affective tones. So the emotional structure is different, which is interesting to me. We have not used that same process to study how citations might be changing or how citation sentiment could change, but that's something that seems like an obvious next question. Since we know it's changing the emotional content, it's probably changing citation sentiment, but we don't know yet. But it's easy to ask. We just need more student power. Yeah.
Hey, thanks. So I was curious about something, and I might be misremembering some of the graphs.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of them, there was a really significant difference in the middle two columns. So man, woman, woman, man.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that might be explained by the fact that last author is, I think in these fields, typically like the PI running
Yes.
the lab. But then, so the pattern that I thought I saw was, yeah. So, okay. So I was looking at the next one, but that might just be,
So this is when we just do the random draw, and then this is when we account for these 5 different factors.
okay, right. So is there any reason, I mean, it's actually a pretty small difference there, but is there any reason you would expect on that one for the undercite or for more citation when you have like a male, I don't know, postdoc or grad student first author and a woman PI as opposed to the opposite, or is that just too small of a difference to?
Yeah, I've thought about this, and because there's a little bit of they swap places. If you just do the random draws model, you can see that there's more undercitation when there's a woman last author, but then when you do it with the all these additional factors, then you see that there's the inverse, where there's more undercitation if there's a woman first author. I hesitated to interpret it because it wasn't consistent across the 2 analyses. Yeah. I think there are definitely, I mean, and baked into this, well, no, the seniority is already there. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, cool. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for just an absolutely fascinating talk. I am especially struck by um, the work around the ways in which when you have larger groups being published and the ways in which that can play out a little differently. And I'm not sure that this is a well-formed question, but I'm curious if you have an intuition about whether there's something kind of going on that's unique in those kind of group publishing dynamics in the sense. Because it's, for instance, I could see a world in which if you're looking at single author publications, you can have a range of biases that apply to the author that's immediately presented to you.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with kind of group publications or whole lab publications or something like that, there's the sense that you can just be dealing with kind of the amorphous et al, or as something like the like Smith and Besties, as it were.
Yes.
And so the kind of robust difference that you're seeing where you have a difference between, say, like a male leading author and a male like trailing author, or a female leading author and female lead or female trailing, as it were, like that just really strikes me as really interesting, given that so much of that can just exist in that kind of amorphous gray blob that if you don't go out of your way, you might never really look at all of the names on that
Yeah.
list, and
Yeah.
you're still seeing the same kind of dynamics that you would expect just kind of play out, and that's really just fascinating to me. So do you have a sense that there's unique dynamics applying to these group contexts that aren't necessarily applying to like single authors in the same way?
Yeah, yes. In neuroscience, I think there is a different dynamic on average between the first and the last author. They tend to do the most of the writing. That's not always the case, but it is a tendency. And then the middle authors tend to make revisions or make suggestions at the end, but they're less involved in the original writing. It is possible that the middle authors are adding citations. I definitely, when I'm a middle author, often suggest specific citations on the paper, so I know that I have some role there, and that's not accounted for in these analyses. What is difficult, though, is that I don't know how to quantify who added something when in the process, especially when there are who of the middle authors. The place where we can actually study the impact of non-first last authors on the citation patterns is actually in the review process, and we haven't we've like dabbled in this, but we don't have a paper yet. But what you can do is that you can take archive papers, so the preprints that we put up, and then you can look at the paper after peer review. And there, in neuroscience, I don't know if this, I'm assuming this also happens in philosophy, but correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of reviewers will suggest extra citations to add. And so you can ask whether the citation parity changes as a function of the review process, especially knowing that in neuroscience, there is a well-documented bias in who is reviewing. And so that's something that we can do, but that's still not addressing middle author contributions.
That's fascinating because I would never have guessed that the propensity would be for first and last authors to be the main writers. Like a lot of times I've encountered, it's like, no, you're kind of ranking basically in terms of who did the most work on the project. So I'd be also fascinated if that just varies by discipline as well, whether that plays out in the patterns you're seeing.
It does, and definitely, yeah. In math, for example, there's at least some subdisciplines in mathematics and specifically applied mathematics where often the authors are listed alphabetically, so not at all related to who contributed the most. That's one of the reasons we haven't studied math yet, because there isn't a clear way of. We would have to study all of the authors, which just makes these figures hard to do, and also the numbers in each of the bins is not a lot of statistical significance, there's not a lot of power. So we need to find a different method to address papers in math. I think philosophy probably has the opposite effect, which makes it easier because you're mostly one author papers, right? Yeah, so that would be a lot simpler.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating.
thank you so much. I like for this amazing day and for this excellent talk.
Sure. Thank you.
I want to give you for your sorry. My brain just stopped. So